Hey, Peaceniks. Today's podcast is one of those podcasts I get to do where I'm reminded that I'm doing something bigger than myself. Meeting people like TeZa is why I got into podcasting. She's an artist and writer. She's a spiritual person, a yogi. She's been all over the world, and she sees hope in humanity. In this new world of political division and COVID and shootings and riots and what happened with Roe versus Wade and all these things happening in the world, she sees this as our rock bottom, but she's optimistic about seeing that, when people hit their rock bottom, what happens? They either die or they wake up to reality and get help, get better. They heal. TeZa thinks that this is what is going to happen to the collective. From this place where we are right now, we will begin to heal and grow and awaken consciously to a higher existence, one that lives in alignment with nature instead of constantly at war with it. She's an author. I just finished her audiobook, Hybrid Vigor. Great and powerful listen. If you have Audible, check it out. Again, that's Hybrid Vigor by TeZa LORD. Also, her books are available on Amazon and her website, TeZaLord.com. That's TeZaLord.com. Also, check out her podcast. She does a podcast with her husband called ZLORD Podcast. ZLORD Podcast. This was a fun conversation. I was very excited to get to talk to her. So let's go ahead and dive in.
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
Drugs are menacing our society.
What are your thoughts on the drug problem?
I had a great time doing drugs.
So tonight, from our family to yours, from our home to yours, thank you for joining us.
This is the Peace on Drugs.
I am in Southwest Florida.
Oh, okay. I'm in St. Augustine.
Oh, awesome. My sister's actually moving there in a few months, so I'm excited to be a little closer to her.
Yeah. St. Augustine's a great place.
Yeah, it definitely is one of our favorite places because my family's from North Carolina, so when I go to visit them, we stop at St. Augustine and stay there on the way.
Right. I just came back from the beach. That's why I was a little late.
No worries.
Yeah.
I'll be on the beach in about an hour and a half or 2 hours.
Great.
We work on the beach, so I got to go down there and play some music.
Good.
Yeah. So so thanks for doing the podcast. I didn't know that you had a podcast. You might have said so. I'm just very scatterbrained, but I listened to some of it today, and it was the one you did solo, talking about the people saying, worry is the world worse off than it is. Everybody's doing this day, and my family's very religious, and they believe it is the end of times, the rapture's coming, all this stuff, and when I see everything happening, not to say that I definitely don't believe in that stuff. It's weird, but I do think that there could be in a way of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If all these people believe it's the end and kind of want it to be the end, then it's not it's not a healthy thing.
Well, that's why people like you and me have to do all the work that we can to, and negate all that negativity with positive vibes and love. And, how we think is how we are, even as a society. So,
yeah.
The doomsday people, they may just all create doomsday for themselves, but there's other people who are not going to be there with them.
Yeah, I'm definitely not there with them either. I think with our new technologies and everything we have in the world, we can use it to self-destruct, or we can use it to build the most beautiful planet that we've ever seen, and where we all can get along so much better. And I was reading Yuval Noah Harari's book. I think it was *Sapiens*, but he was talking about how that the Earth is actually a much safer place to live today than it has been throughout the history of humanity.
But he's pretty
Yeah.
Forward thinker, isn't he? Did you read *Sapiens*? Or are you talking about the second book he had?
I read all three of them. I did the audiobooks for the other two, and I think it was *Sapiens* that I'm thinking of, where he said that the Earth's actually safer, but we don't see it that way because of the news. When you watch the news and you're watching the media, you're seeing all the very worst things that are happening. And if you think that's what the world is, people forget to look at your own life. Look at when you go out to the store, when you go out to work, how much violence are you seeing day to day, and you're not seeing. I never see it. It does happen, and it's sad when it does. But
sensationalism sells, news would be very boring if people said, okay, it's a great world out there, and we're getting closer and closer to becoming enlightened. and in peace. I mean, nobody would buy a newspaper, nobody would tune in. I mean, they just the whole entertainment world and news world feeds off controversy and drama. That's why they do it.
It does. They call it like the negative bias, because I think throughout evolution, if the things that were negative that could affect us negatively could potentially kill us. So we had to pay close attention to the negative things. Like if there was the analogy that was used was, or the example that was used was, if there was fruit on a tree, we could run up and grab the fruit and eat. But if there was a lion waiting on the corner, that would be the end of us. But if we waited and were very cautious and made sure we checked our surroundings, the fruit will still be there, so we can wait. And that's why we focus on the negative much more than the positive.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. To be aware is the trick. To have expanded awareness, and to see and to recognize as much as you can. And there have been other civilizations on this planet that have disappeared. So, that's an inevitability. How many cats do you have?
Just the one. I didn't know he was in here. I kept the door closed. Probably let him out. Yeah, actually, if you don't mind, I'm just going to throw him out of the room real quick.
Okay. There we go. See.
Sorry about that. Yeah,
it's all right. I love cats, but unfortunately, I have an allergy. My body, it just changed, and you have to accept the way the body. I know it stinks, but anyway, I can pet their auras.
Yeah,
around them, they can feel it. You go up to a cat, and cats always know who's allergic to them, because they sense the vibe, and they come right for you. And I just pet their aura, and they're happy. Then they go away.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I love my cats. I have a slight allergy, but not bad enough to really affect me. But, eyes itch and stuff if it gets too close to my head. But and
I always want to just bury my face in the fur. I can never just stop halfway. Or if a cat's around me, I want to just snuggle with it. So that sets everything off.
Yeah, that's one of the things that you talk. I mean, you have a really deep love for animals. You talk about that in your book, and there was one, sorry. Go ahead.
Were you reading Hybrid Vigor?
Yeah.
Is that's the one that you chose to read? That's good.
I got the audiobook. And I've been listening to it. And it's the one part you were swimming with dolphins in the wild, and I was so jealous. I've swam with dolphins. I swam with them in the Cayman Islands. They have where they heal the ones that get injured, so you can swim with the dolphins there.
Right.
And that was really awesome.
Yeah, well, that particular story was so amazing to me too. That's why I had to write about it, where I just wanted to test. Okay, they say that we can communicate without speaking to the cetacean world, the whales, the dolphins. And so I that's what I was doing. I was testing. I was sending out this vibration just silently. And a scout came almost instantly. And you remember the rest of the story. The scout came, and then the others came, and pretty soon there's a whole pod, like 30 of them. And I just felt so blessed to have that experience. Really blessed.
Yeah, that's amazing. Just to be out in the wild. I'm living here in Florida. I see dolphins all the time, and I'm always, when I'm playing music on the beach, I just keep my eyes on the water, because it makes my day when I see a dolphin jump up out of the water.
And they're out there, even in warm weather like now. I live right off the Intercoastal Waterway, and the dolphins are there. Usually they don't come in because it's hot. The ocean today is 85 degrees. And that's perfect for me. I mean, I don't like to even get into it unless it's like 80 something. So for them to come inland like that, they just are just jolly characters, they're just checking everything out.
They're very playful. I got into fishing when I first moved down here, and I don't do that anymore. I don't just kind of grew out of it. But I noticed that the fishermen hated the dolphins when they came, because they said they scare away the fish. And I'm like, I'd rather see the dolphins than catch any fish. I don't care about catching the fish. And they would come up, and it was just so funny. My buddies had a bait fish, and he threw it to an osprey to get, and the dolphin ran out and stole it from the osprey. Just seeing that kind of nature, stuff like that happen is so cool.
Well, people like that who can't take a moment from their pattern, they think, okay, this is what life is, or this is who I am. I'm a fisherman. I got to fish. And they can't alter their set pattern for a few minutes even to just enjoy the delight and the spontaneity of a dolphin appearing. I mean, that's really sad, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I just, like I say, I like being in nature. I got into fishing to be at the beach, not to catch fish. It was like, and now that's why I don't do it anymore, I guess, because like I can just go to the beach and just hang out. I don't have to. It's a lot of work. But
my mom was a fisherman. She was embarrassed because my motto is, "You catch it, I'll cook it."
yeah.
I don't really like to. I have no patience, but I'm surrounded in a family with fishermen. But I love to cook it, even when I experimented with vegetarianism. But fish is really good to eat. My mother lived to be 97 and a half because she ate fish 6 times a week, and she would bury the guts under her garden, and her garden was so profuse and beautiful. She never used fertilizer. She just used like cow manure, horse manure, and fish guts.
Making me want to get back into fishing, because I do think it's one of the best. If you're one of the most the environmentally friendly is if you hunt your own fish. Because they regulate it very well with keep making sure the populations don't go down, and then that fish lives a good life. It's it's the circle of nature.
Yeah,
and I didn't know about you could use it in your garden, because that would be awesome.
My mother called it her meditation. I'm a formal kind of meditative person, like I like to do rituals, but she would call it her meditation, and she would have her lines out, and usually she had 2 lines out, and she would read a book in between. And while she was waiting for the fish to bite, she didn't like visiting that much with other fishermen, but she used that as a time to just be peaceful and calm while you're waiting. So it's funny that I don't like it. It's just one of those things where, I don't know, hooks and worms and, bait and stuff like that. It's just doesn't turn me on.
Yeah, we use live shrimp, and I hate it because you have to reach and they're jumping around. It's just really it's not my thing, but I enjoy fishing a little bit, but I just enjoy being at the beach. Yeah.
This is a good topic for a podcast that deals with, what's the name of your podcast? It's
the
like
Peace on Drugs.
Yeah. Fishing is drugs.
Yeah. Well, I've been debating to pivoting the podcast a little bit to do more of the piece on different things. We did a piece on abortion recently, talking about the Roe versus Wade thing. But I have all these. Yeah, and everybody's on different sides. Like some of my family are celebrating it, and some women are terrified. It's just I think it's a horrible thing personally, but.
It's one of those mysteries of life where I just know it'll work out. The swinging of the pendulum, anything that has to do with politics or society, it's like it swings and then it goes back the other way, and it swings and it goes back the other way. And there's going to be a lot of death. The people who call themselves pro-lifers, they don't realize how many women are going to die because they're still going to need abortions. And a lot of women are going to die. And it's really sad because I call myself a pro-lifer because I'm pro-life, but I'm a pro-choice too person because everybody should have a choice over their bodies. So I can understand both sides of the argument, but it's totally political.
It is political, and
it'll get worked out. I know it'll get worked out.
I really hope it does. And they use Christianity to justify their views, but the Bible says nothing about abortion. And you get into the debate of, it says thou shalt not kill, but you have to say that that's a life before it's born. And I feel like if it was such an issue for the God, which I hate that we have to even argue about this book when talking about political things, but it's important when half the country is hardcore believes in this stuff. But the idea is that if it was that important to your God, why wouldn't he actually just come out and say exactly that? And they pick and choose what they want. Bible says,
people who use the Bible, they can find any argument whatsoever. They'll just find the certain passage. Well, they say, see, I told you. And I've heard amazingly insane arguments being justified by finding a certain passage. And then there's really esoteric passages that people forget that Jesus said, that he is like just showing us what to be like. He did not say that, I am the only one. He never said that.
Yeah, well, Eckhart Tolle was talking about it, and Eckhart Tolle said that the way he interpreted it was when Jesus said, I am the only way to heaven. He was talking about for himself, as in you're the only way to heaven. I'm the only way to heaven for me. But everybody took it as, we have to go to him to get to heaven.
Right.
Like it's like we were looking at his finger that was pointing, not what he was pointing at.
I'm into Christ consciousness. I'm into everybody should be Christ-like in their consciousness. But when you start thinking of Christ as the Savior, that if you don't believe in him, you're going to hell, well, then that excludes so many people. And Jesus would say, no, no, no. Jesus would definitely not be into that.
That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, he saw love of everything. And when he started doing his missionary work, becoming public, he was already so formed and so strong. He was in his 30s, and he just went up against all the people who had rules. And that's exactly what he was against. Like, there should be no rule around the sacred, around the divine. It's just the experience of having it, and however it manifests in whatever person, that's how it is. And so I'm all with you. And Eckhart Tolle is a great teacher. I think he's a perfect modern teacher for this era, for this time, because he's so scholarly, and he's been to hell and back, because his personal story is like he came so close to wanting to just end his life because he was filled with despair, and then he just had kind of a spontaneous awakening because he wanted it, and also because he was in such despair. So it gives me hope that despair does have a purpose. Despair pushes people to the edge, and people are saying, oh, how terrible what's going on in our society these days. To me, it's not terrible, because we are in a crisis in this society of ours, but we're being pushed to the despair that Christ even experienced, before he was crucified, and Eckhart Tolle experienced. And anybody who decides to put down a bad thing, like an addict, I'm a recovering person. Nobody just wakes up and says, oh, I think I'm going to put down drugs and alcohol today. I think I'm going to just meditate and experience, the divine through that method. So despair has a purpose. And I think we should announce it also that the feds have now initiated a new hotline for mental health people. It's 988. And if anybody feels suicidal, please call that number and get some help. Because, despair will push people to wanting to kill themselves. And if they can just hold on and just know that it's a perfectly human thing to feel despair, that we can come out of it in a better place. And you can see the glory for having gone through the darkness.
Definitely. And I personally have, been through some really dark times myself, and I got out of it. I will say this though, you said that you had to hit rock bottom in order to get better, and so sometimes that despair is a great teacher, and if you learn from it and it doesn't kill you, some people don't survive it, but and that's why you're saying if you can survive it and get through it, life will get better. You can find purpose. But for some people like me, there wasn't the rock bottom that got me out of it. I slowly crawled out from being in a bad place. I kept using substances, and then I got to a place where I found happiness without substances. And then I found where I still smoke pot and I still drink, and I just don't do it in excess like I used to. I used to want to drink to forget who I was. Now I just have a few drinks to enjoy myself. And everybody's different. But I think though, for this rock bottom thing is definitely prevalent in our society, where we have a world of prohibition and a black market, that if you're addicted to drugs in this world that we've created, you're going to have a very hard time. And rock bottom can be what he says, enough's enough, I'm going to get better. But in a place like Switzerland, where they offer people access to the substances that they're addicted to, they see people get better without hitting rock bottom. They see people get off drugs who just decide that it's not, their life's back together, they're happy, they don't want to keep going to the heroin clinic, and they phase out of it. And so I think that's an important.
That's great. Yes, it is. It's important to know that everybody is different. We're not cookie cutters, and my experience is just my experience, and your experience is yours. And there's not just one way of being a human being, or else we would be just automatons. But I mean, it's true, as kids were taught, each one of us is as different as a snowflake. And then when you think, what, snowflakes are different? And you look and you see that every single one is different. I mean, that's mind-blowing in that, just to think that. And so, of course, if snowflakes are different, we are all different. And even our bodies are different. I mean, I'm going through PT right now, and my PT guy said they have to take some kind of not just anatomy, but they have to work with corpses, and they have to really look at the way the body's structured. And some people's like veins are crisscrossed from other people's. They're not just all in this regular kind of pattern that people think we are. So, the medical people have to deal with all sorts of variables. And of course, we who are interested in expanding our consciousness, we also have to deal with every single person is different. There is no pat way. But the danger is when people start proselytizing and they say, no, it has to be this way. Like you mentioned about how some of the, extreme religious people, not just Christians, every extremist group is like that.
Yeah.
Every extremist group.
Definitely. And I bring up Christians mostly because in our country, Christianity is the biggest, but it's still not the only one. And my family and where I've grown up and what seems to be happening politically is coming from the Christians in this country. But like you said, there's, the Islamic countries have a lot of things that they do that I don't understand. It is a weird thing in our world where if you talk bad about Islam and some of the things that they do, the way they treat women, the liberals call you a xenophobic and all this, but it seems like the liberals that would want to say that the religious things like this shouldn't be happening. I don't know.
Well, they have made it so that certain things have to be acknowledged. They can't go around having the clitorectomies, for instance, chopping out women's genitals. I mean, that's extreme Islamic stuff that happens mostly in Ethiopia. And so they've made that illegal. But things like a woman, if she wants to wear a whatever it's called, the scarf. Look at me, I wear a buff. Some people think, take that thing off. But it makes me feel comfortable. It keeps my hair in place. I mean, and a woman wearing a scarf, I've heard many of them say it makes them feel very safe and secure, that they're not being stared at or thought of in a sexual manner by strangers. But America was founded on religious freedom, the Pilgrims, because on my father's side, his family came over on the second load of Pilgrims. So I've always thought about the beginnings of our country. And then on my mother's side, she was a first generation immigrant from Lithuania. So I have both. And the Pilgrims, they came to America because they really wanted to have religious freedom to express their strange, in those days, forms of Christianity. They were considered outcasts in England. So they came here in droves. And that has a lot to do with our founding country's ways. Because I went to school in Boston. And did you ever hear about the Blue Laws?
No.
They're left over from colonial times. And when I was in college, that was during the 60s, and it was very weird. They had the Blue Laws still, which is going back to when the Pilgrims first came into this country, and they were just very old-fashioned. Like, all the bars had to close at, way before midnight, and just odd little things. Women couldn't work like hard jobs. They couldn't climb ladders, silly little things like that. But this country was founded on those principles. And so, even like a person will have a karma because of their astrological inclinations or how they were raised and all that. And a country has a karma. And I do believe that this country was, the karma it's got a lot to do with expressing religion or spiritual freedom. Look on our dollar bill, and God we trust. I mean, what other country says that?
That's true. I mean, we definitely, the separation of church and state might be on paper, but it's not really. We definitely have a lot of religion in our politics. But one thing Colbert said, I think it was on an NPR interview, he was saying that if you allow religion into your politics, then there's nothing to stop politics from getting into your religion, and that's what happened in Europe, and that's what we're trying to avoid here. That everybody can worship how they want to worship, can have whatever spiritual practice they want, and we're not going to kill each other over it. We're going to all get along with our separate beliefs.
Amen to that. Yeah. Along with amen, I always say, women too. I know at the end we always say grace, because I like to bless everything. So we say our blessing, and my husband, who's a Christian, and he'll end the prayer with amen. And I'll say, and all women too.
I love that. Let me ask you this. So if your husband's Christian and you're, and you said you consider yourself
I'm a mystic. I'm an Eastern mystic. And of course I was raised differently. I'm a, Christian Sufi soldier, I call myself. I'm a lifelong yoga practitioner.
Oh,
so
great.
that's basically Eastern mysticism. Buddha was a yogi, just for people who get yoga mixed up with. It's not just the exercises that people are doing today. It's a way of life. It's a philosophy, and the scriptures are very ancient. The Vedas and the Yoga Sutras and all these very ancient scriptures that go back thousands of years. And then Buddha, who was a yogi, and his followers called him the Buddha, which means enlightened one. So Buddhism is pretty similar to what the yogic philosophy is.
That's
but I'm a yogi. Mm-hmm.
And I've heard theories. I don't know if there's anything truth to this, that Jesus, when he was in the desert and lost for that certain amount of time, that he went east and was practicing Buddhism and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's some references to Yeshua in some Indian text. It's a mystery. Where was Jesus? Where did he go? Well, I've heard that he even went east and went to Glastonbury. Oh, that's west. That's from Israel. It's west. So I've been in Glastonbury, and they say they have proof from some ancient British texts that Jesus, who had an uncle who was a merchant, actually went sailing to parts of the UK today. And there are some references to Yeshua being in India. And, that really makes sense to me. I saw a documentary it's called The Lost Years of Jesus. And if you've never seen it, it's very interesting. It has a lot of documentation that supports that theory.
Write that down.
Yeah, The Lost Years of Jesus.
Are you familiar at all with the psychedelic theory of the early church being a psychedelic cult?
Oh, no, tell me.
So
which early church?
The early Christian church. And when I first heard this, I just thought, yeah, because I love psychedelics personally, and I've learned a lot from them. But I also think that some people that do psychedelics, they think it's this, panacea, and that it's, everybody gets immediate enlightenment, which is just not true. And when I heard the early church being a psychedelic cult, I immediately was just like, this is ridiculous. Like, I didn't even look into it. And then an author that wrote this book called The Lost Key, I believe. I have it somewhere. The Immortality Key, Brian Rescue. He was on a podcast, and he was explaining how he's never done psychedelics in his life, which was why he got a lot more credit because of that. He was actually Harvard graduate, and I believe Harvard. It doesn't matter.
What was his name?
Brian Muir Rescue. If I'm saying that right.
Okay, something like that. I'll look it up.
Yeah, the Immortality Key. The Immortality Key by Muir Rescue.
Whoa.
But they're actually teaching,
pretty good.
They're actually teaching a course at Harvard based on this book, because it is how amazing it was. But basically, he was reading. He was a lawyer, and he was reading in this magazine about psychedelic research that they were doing at one of the universities, where they were terminal people were giving psilocybin mushrooms, and were having these amazing experiences, and were no longer scared of death. And as he's reading their experiences, he remembered something he was studying when he was in college, was the Ellucian Mysteries. And this was the old Greek mysteries, where they would go to Eleusis, and they would have these, and it's always been a mystery of what were they doing there. But when they would come back from these mysteries, they would all say the same thing. They were no longer afraid of death. They knew there was an afterlife. And so the theory was that they were doing some sort of psychedelic and having some sort of psychedelic ritual there. And then it was illegal, though, in Greece to use the psychedelics outside of the temple in Eleusis. So only the rich and the well-educated people that could afford to go to Eleusis got these experiences. But what happened, the same thing happened here, is you get underground raves happening. You get underground parties where people are taking whatever that mixture is, whatever that psychedelic they were doing. They possibly think it was something similar to LSD, because that ergot, the fungus that grows on wheat, is where you can get it. Anyway, so the idea was, and that's where they had these Dionysian parties, they called them, and Dionysus was the wine god.
Yeah.
And so dying, and this was written 400 years before Christ, and he was born of a virgin mother because his father was Zeus, so God was his father. And his first trick was he went to a party and they ran out of wine, and he turned the water into wine, and he was the wine god. So then, when John's writing about Jesus, he says the same thing about Jesus. And what Brian Rescue theorizes is that he was actually speaking to the Greeks to let them know Jesus is doing the same thing that the Dionysian parties were. It's the same thing. Like, come hang out with us in Israel. We're having some underground psychedelic ritual things, and that's where the church got its whole foundation from.
Wow, that's interesting. I would definitely check out that book. I mean, who knows? Who knows, and who cares? I mean, I'm more about the moment, but I mean, I think I'm fascinated with. I don't consider that a conspiracy theory. I mean, really, there's so many mysteries in life. Anything could be, and there certainly have been concerted efforts on the Christian church's part to exclude a lot of really wonderful things from the Bible. We know about that from 300 AD. They basically took out the Apocrypha, which has to do with all the things about Christ consciousness, that everybody is eligible for this consciousness. The leaders of the church did not want the uneducated people to have access to this knowledge. So I wouldn't doubt that possibility, the Immortality Key. And I've never heard of that. I am very affiliated with Harvard. I think I explained that to you in our earlier discussion before we had the podcast, that I did work with Schultes, Richard Evans Schultes, who's considered the father of ethnobotany. He's the one who basically brought to the Western world ayahuasca, yahe, and psilocybin, and the use of peyote and coca by the Incas and all that. So I did a lot of work with him. I was an illustrator, but I was also like a research assistant, not for Professor Schulte so much, but his botanists who were working for their degrees, people who were studying under Schulte. So I'm very aware of the fact that all these mysteries have been unearthed little by little, and some of them just in this last 100 years. I mean, when you think about it, like Machu Picchu, for instance, was not even known to Western people until like the 1950s. And I went to Machu Picchu before the pandemic, and I just had this amazing experience because I feel so connected to the Inca because their reverence for nature is so strong. And who knows, we're probably all connected through what vibrates in our being, like if I feel connected to the Inca as opposed to, the ancient, whatever, Dionysian cult, that just means that's what sets off my vibration and what interests me today. But we probably have all experienced these things through the evolution of our soul, because I do believe in reincarnation. And it's just evident to me ever since I was a little kid. It's the only thing that makes any sense, why some people are just born with so much knowledge and other people are just like, what? They're at the very beginning of accruing knowledge. So if there is this evolution of the soul, we've been involved with all these cultures, not just what we experience today, but there's this cellular memory, there's this energy that resonates. And when we hear about an ancient story that tantalizes us, that's probably because we maybe we're there,
yeah. It's interesting. And you talked about that, how pain has kind of shaped our world. And if you think about what you're talking about with this cellular memory, all the pain and the things that have happened through war that are getting less and less, it's like the human family is healing, but slowly. And there's still going to be pockets, like you said, the pendulum is going to get into some territory that gets dangerous. COVID was hard on a lot of people mentally, and so I think that maybe set us back, or maybe that's one of the final blows to get it over with. I don't know. Is it
COVID's a mystery? It still hasn't ended, that's for sure.
Yeah, I just had it.
Oh, you did? Wow.
Yeah, about 6 weeks ago.
I'm a virgin.
Yeah,
But
I went with all the shots, got boosted. I was like, and I just felt very confident because of that. So I wasn't afraid of it. And I had a friend that was exposed and he was coming to stay with me, but he didn't have any symptoms. I was like, I'm not worried about it. And it turned out we got COVID from him. So, and
oh wow,
it was pretty bad.
Were you very sick? Oh, you was
not
bad.
not hospital level sick, just like bad
Yeah.
fever.
Yeah.
Didn't really get too much shortness of breath, but it felt like a weird flu, but it was I got dizzy. And but the weird thing was it would last for a few weeks afterwards. It just kept weird waves of dizziness and stuff. I'm finally completely better. So,
well, that's good. I'm glad. I think that probably all of us will get it sooner or later, but I'm happy not to be like in the forward vanguard. And already now it's lessened. I mean, no doubt because you've been vaccinated and boosted and everything. And also the strain has gotten weaker. It's much easier now to not die from it. But who knows? I mean, if we look at the spiritual impact of COVID, I mean, I do believe everything happens for a reason. I think that our whole culture needed to have a breaking and a reset. And there were a lot of people who used it as an opportunity, being isolated and being forced to stay home, and to use it as an opportunity to explore their inner life. And then there's a lot of people who didn't, who just freaked out and got fat and got miserable and missed their friends and got mad. So there's both.
mm-hmm.
And for me, it pushed me into being more public by offering more like meditation. I do these mind stillers up on my YouTube channel, offering more comfort and more tools for people who are feeling anxious and having a hard time with being isolated and not being able to just do what they're used to doing. And it was interesting too, because my husband and I, he's such a great character. We've been together for 30 years. We had been camping for 6 months before the pandemic. And we went all over like Canada and the Western United States and ended up in Texas before we came back to Florida where we live. And then the pandemic hit. So we were so used to being isolated from the normal life, being with our buds, doing what people do when they're home, cooking on a camp stove with just whatever we had in our car at the moment. And most of all, just really feeling connected with nature. And so I thought it was a great spiritual opportunity. And yes, it's very sad that so many people died. And it's true that a lot of people had a hard time. But I think enough of us had a good experience of fortifying our spiritual connection with what this world is all about, that we're in a better place now. I mean, I feel that it's almost like showdown at the OK Corral. There's people who are filled with hope, and there's other people who are filled with despair. And like, there's not so much a battle, but there's the hope people are like, I just know it's going to be okay. And the despair people are going to burn out because that kind of anger and negativity is either going to make people sick or really unhappy with life. So there is this animated intensity going on, plus also the pandemic, because it threw off the whole world, the economy. I mean, that one ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal messed up the shipping for, probably for years. And so now we have inflation. It's like, and I'm thinking like, how does a person who's just getting by on a shoestring, how do they function? I mean, because prices are just sky high.
Yeah, it's been very hard for some people with inflation. And then you also have the political elements of what's going on, because I think there's one reason why we have such a divide politically is because never in the history or never in my lifetime has politics played such a personal role in our lives, where our governor's deciding whether you're shut down or you're open or you can go out or you can go to the beach is they're telling everybody, exactly what to do, wear a mask here, you go walk this way in the grocery store. And a lot of people, for them, they couldn't handle that. They couldn't, so they just erupted politically. And then we had in my opinion, a very erratic president who was just going off the handle, constantly saying all these hateful things. And it's weird because I see, I live in Trump country down here. There's flags everywhere. And the thing is I've never been bothered by political things. If I disagree with you politically and you have a sticker, I'd never care. But the weird thing about this one is that the election's been over and the flags aren't going away. And that's a very strange thing that you never seen in the past. Like when Bill Clinton won the election, his opponent there wasn't flags for his opponent for the next 4 years. It was just a weird thing that's happening. So a lot of hate is getting built on both sides. People see the Trumps and they get mad, and I see it on Facebook. They don't just say, "Here's why I disagree with you." They say, "Here's why I disagree with you, you effing idiot." And it's like, you can't, the hate, you're losing me. If I might agree with what you're saying, but you lose me when you throw that venom right back out, because it goes both ways. So, well,
let me ask you a question. Why are you on Facebook? Why do you put yourself in that poisonous situation?
You're very correct, but I for work I have to with I have to post gigs, I have to post stuff for my podcast. It's what I'm supposed to be doing, at least. I mean, I guess I don't have to, but it's supposed to be.
You can't just run in and post and run out.
Oh, I know. I typically do that. That's typically what I do.
I have a Facebook presence, but I know what you mean. The vitriolic dialogue is poisonous. And I glimpse it, but I run in and I make my little meditation, contribution to the collective consciousness, which I want to help uphold the positive end of things. And I'm not judging you or anything. I'm just saying that don't just run in and do your thing and run out, because it's poison. I mean, that whole dialogue where people get into it and they get off on it. Come on, it's an addiction to be in anger and to be right. And people get in there and their adrenaline's pumping and they're getting all hot and they want to kill somebody because it's an addiction. And it's just the opposite of love, where love is accepting, what is. So I just highly recommend that you run in and run out and get out.
No, and I do try to do that, but you're right though. Sometimes it's addiction. I run in and then I see, what is this? And I start reading and I'm like, wait a minute. And then you get sucked right into it.
No,
but
don't do it.
See, the problem with Facebook for me is that is we're not connected on Facebook, right? Like there's a divide. And I use the analogy of when you're driving in your car, there are people that will flip somebody off and do everything because there's a divide, because you're not beside them. But you wouldn't do the same thing in an elevator or in a line at the bank. You would never just be like, oh, somebody started to cut you off. There's very few reactions where someone's going to start cussing and flipping them off.
Yeah.
Because they're connected. They're like, there's a little more respect. But as soon as there's a divide and people feel like I'm not immediately, I don't know, it's a weird thing, but Facebook becomes like a fake social. It's like a fake society. It's not real life.
But it's not just Facebook, it's all social media. But social media does, like you said at the beginning of our conversation, there is a purpose for technology. And it is a creation of our intelligence and creativity and all that. So it can be used for a good thing. But the bad aspect of technology, I believe, is this terrible kind of poison that's happening with people who really like to argue, really like to be right. And they're all on Facebook. I mean, I hear it all the time. And I know so many people who just refuse to go on Facebook. And just because it's hard to run in and run out without seeing it, you can't go like that. And one of the reasons why I post meditation videos up on YouTube is people go to YouTube for a reason. If they want to do a meditation, they'll go there and they'll type in meditation and they'll, hashtag meditation or something, and they'll find me or not. But they're not just in there for having an argument. And I know a lot of people who've just sworn off social media, and they don't have to use it for business, but you do. So just get a pair of blinders and go in and do your posting and get the hell out of there, because it'll suck you in. And I know you don't want that kind of an addiction. That kind of there's a lot of people who are addicted to negative emotion. I'm not saying that you are, but when I feel it in myself, for instance, if I feel like, things are bad, well, then I catch myself saying, oh, there I go again. That's a despair. That's a little seed of of hopelessness. And I said, no, I'm not going to allow it to be in there. I'm going to replace it with, there's a never ending abundance of creative energy when you allow yourself to be unblocked from that negative stuff. And who's to say who's going to like invent, the next power source? We're going to run it on air or water. I mean, anything can happen if we are unblocked from our creative sources. And so for me, it's definitely dangerous to have any kind of a thought about, oh God, I want to argue. Oh, I want to get in there and prove that I'm right. And I was with some friends the other night, and they're all very spiritual friends. And all of a sudden the conversation went into, to me, a pretty dark place. And I just decided to sit there and observe and not say anything, but they were all saying how terrible things are, and the Supreme Court this, and the investigations into January 6th that, and just bad despair, and oh my God, what are we going to do on the climate, or our world's going to end. And I just sat there, and finally, when everybody had their say, I said what I told you earlier. I said, yes, the world is having a bottom. We're having a crisis, but guess what? It's going to push people against the wall, and they're going to be forced to change, because they're finally going to see, wow, I can't take it anymore. It's so bad. And like, I've been feeling that the world is on the crises since the 70s. I've known that the environment is crumbling since the 70s when I worked with the earth scientists at Harvard. It's not just something that happened yesterday. And finally, people are waking up. And because of the crises, because of the hardship and the anger, people are going to say, you know what? I'm sick of it. I'm going to change. Just like you said, you're going to dig yourself out of whatever weird addiction you had with psychedelics. You were going to change your life. So you just had moderate experiences, and you weren't going to be a slave to these altered states. You didn't have to be a slave to them to enjoy what they gave you. And so I believe that this time of crises in our world is going to serve a wonderful purpose of igniting this awakened consciousness, which is higher consciousness. And it's not just reliant upon how many trips of ayahuasca or LSD or, mescaline or whatever did you have. It's like, if whatever experience you had, how are you sustaining it? How are you keeping that consciousness so it comes with you every day to Walmart's, to Facebook, to the drive to school? I mean, it's up to us to maintain that consciousness, however we've been gifted it, either through a drug experience or a religious experience, or somebody close to us dying, and all of a sudden we're touched by the magic of life, and we realize that this life is magic. This life itself, to be alive, we're in that state of sacredness. I just came from the sea, and I was crying because I was in the waves, and I just said, oh my God, this planet is so beautiful. The waves are touching me. And I'm feeling very ecstatic too, because I had surgery on my neck a year ago, and I couldn't go near the waves because, your neck is sensitive. And so now it's stabilized, and I'm feeling like, oh, what a blessing. I've come out from this dark place where I couldn't touch something that I love so much, like the surf. And I'm looking at the clouds, and I'm thinking just like, what a blessing. The surf, this life, the healing, the ability of technology to bring healing, and like the love I have in my life, a mate who honors and supports me. I mean, when you think about all the majesty that we're surrounded by, I mean, it's almost like, who would waste their time on the negative? Who would do that?
Yeah, I guess people that are in very bad places, like when I remember one time when I was going through my addiction, which was actually with opiates, and just when you're going through that kind of painful withdrawal, and you're trying to, and you want to stop using, but it was so hard. And I remember being at the beach and looking at the water and almost crying because I didn't find it beautiful. I couldn't see any beauty in it, and I knew it was because I'd always loved it. And I was like, where's that beauty I see? And I got I got over my Vicodin addiction, and then and actually psychedelics helped me.
So how did you do that?
Well,
How did you?
I stopped cold turkey, but I was many times. I would just quit, go through the withdrawals, but then it would always, I would have relapses because it was hard because you have days when you just don't feel right because your body's still healing. And it was easy for me because I had a really easy connection. So I was like, you know what, I'm just going to do them. And then when I finally quit, and I remember I had a friend that I would, when I moved to North Carolina and I stopped using it there. And then I had a friend that had an addiction also, and I would start to go through withdrawals. I'd reach out and get some from him, some Oxycontin or something. And those were a little stronger than what I was used to. But then he found a hookup for fentanyl. And he said, I found this new stuff. I'd never heard of it. He said, it's a new stuff. It's a nasal spray. It's fentanyl. It's cheap. We can get as much as we want. And that's when I said,
oh my God,
that's when
so
I said,
dangerous.
I know. That's when I said, I decided, I was like, I don't want to try it. I'm just going to go ahead and quit. Anything that's super easy to get and super cheap is going to keep me addicted for a lot longer. So I didn't do it. And I just quit opiates for then. And I haven't done them since. But my buddy got onto the fentanyl and he was really bad. I thought he was going to die. And he actually is off it now. And he came and visited me and he's doing a lot better. But it was, what he went through was a lot worse. But anyway, my point is that we it's hard to see the beauty in things if we can't find the beauty within ourselves. So we have to get to a place where we're happy, and then the world is amazing.
Yeah. So, oh God, I can relate so much to what you're talking about. Because when I was at the end of my drug and drinking story, I looked in the mirror and I looked in my eyes and I said, wow, there's nothing in there. It was like my spirit had died. It was like there was nobody home. That freaked me out more than anything. And I said, wow, I may as well be dead if I didn't see there was any life in my eyes. And I went to get help. I went to the 12 steps of recovery. And that's how I dragged myself out. I mean, I almost find it impossible to think that I could do it without the help of the 12 steps, because I tried so many times to get out of addiction before that on my own. So you have a very strong will. You have a very, very strong connection to your heart chakra. And I commend you and more power to you that you could do it like that.
Thank you. It did. It was, wasn't easy. So I did read Russell Brand's Recovery, which is basically based on the 12-step program, but it's kind of for people who aren't into the religious thing. And that book actually helped me a lot.
He's great. I love Russell Brand. Yeah. He was a good friend of Amy Winehouse, and you know that's what blew his mind.
Yeah, he tried to save her before he would reach out to her and say, you really need to get into the program, and that was sad, really sad.
Well, the 12 steps are beautiful. I mean, the history of the 12 steps is very interesting for people who might want to know that it's a spiritual thing. It's not a religious thing. And it was basically the guys who started AA, they wrote to Dr. Jung, Carl Jung, who was the psychiatrist who was dealing with addiction. And Jung is very well known for really bringing spirituality to the mainstream of human culture, because he worked with dreams and he worked with the inner guides, and Carl Jung's work was amazing. And so he wrote to these two guys who wanted to really make sure that they continued with this great ability to stay sober, because they realized if they talked to each other, they didn't want to get high. And so Jung said, it's absolutely mandatory that you have a spiritual awakening. And they said, well, okay, but how do we do that? And so then they found out about what's called the Oxford Group. Do you know about this story?
I do not know the whole story, no.
Yeah, the Oxford Group were a bunch of intellectual and atheists who were from Oxford University in England. And Jung knew about them because his specialty was trying to help people who had addictions. This was way before AA started. And so the Oxford Group had decided that in order to have a spiritual awakening, they had to go through certain steps, which at that time were just 8 steps. And that's where the steps came from. And so between the Oxford Group and Jung, the guys who started AA in America, they got those 12 steps together. So it's got a really interesting history. And it's all about a spiritual fellowship. And it's wherever you go in this world, I can walk into a 12-step recovery meeting and I feel like I'm at home because they're talking my language,
Yeah. Yeah.
They really, it's a certain bond that you get into when you go through the 12 steps.
Yeah, and it definitely works for a lot of people. And for those who it works with, I 100% support it. And I've even talked about it because my podcast is about drugs. And I think that sobriety is not the only answer for everybody. But for some people, it's a great, if you can do it and you can find happiness sober, then why wouldn't you be sober?
Yeah.
It does, it makes sense. But I remember I went to some 12-step meetings with my wife, and it was, you listen to people talk, they would say the same thing, that if they couldn't make the meeting in time, they would actually go all the way across town to a different meeting because they had to get to one of those meetings because that was what they're solid in their life that they needed to have.
Yeah, that was their new addiction. It becomes your new
that's what I saw it as. But I guess again, it's a better addiction to have if you're drinking to the point where you're driving, getting DUIs, and your life's destroyed. Then it's a better addiction to have. Same with people that get into running.
For people who have had enough, they wanted to change, and the only way to change a negative addiction is to introduce a positive addiction. So that's where the, going to be addicted to the rooms, they call it, the meetings, whatever. But anyway, like before we end our discussion, did you want to hear a little bit about my psychedelic story? Yeah. Or should that be phase 2? That we should have, part 2, TeZa ZLORD.
I think we could do a part 2, or we can go into it right now. Tell me what you'd like.
Well, we could do a quickie version. I mean, I basically was obsessed about having the ultimate experience. I mean, ever since I was a kid, I just wanted to have the ultimate. And I started as a kid, not drugs, but doing things like Andy Wild talks about, Dr. Andrew Wild, he talks a lot about the natural mind. That was his first book. It was called The Natural Mind, how people just need to have some kind of altered experience. So they either eat too much and start to vomit, or they twirl. The kids are always twirling, and you make angels in the snow because you just kind of get off on that, and you do things to just make yourself just go ridiculously out of your ordinary mind. And so I started as a high school kid. I basically was also come from a home where there are a lot of bad things happening, alcoholism and not such great, spirituality. So I wanted to escape. And by the time I reached college, I was definitely an alcoholic already, but it was the 60s and LSD was right there. And so I became part of the early cult, the Leary and Alpert cult that used LSD religiously, ritualistically to experience ego death. And that was where the beginning of my psychedelic experiences began. And we used to use the Tibetan Book of the Dead that had been published by Leary and Alpert to help people to experience the guided steps of going through ego death. And from there, I just did whatever I could that was available until I finally realized that I had had enough. And that's a long story there. But I have been sober, and I mean really sober, for almost 40 years. No drugs, no alcohol. And I have never been higher in my life because of my dedication to yogic practices and meditation and doing all sorts of disciplines.
That's great. And now Alpert ended up, he changed his name to Ram Dass, right?
Baba Ram Dass, yes. Yeah, he went to India and he became Baba Ram Dass.
And he was sober at that point, right? He wasn't still into psychedelics later in his life, was he?
Oh no! As soon as he met his guru, who he became Baba Ram Dass with, he never. I don't know. He might have taken some drugs later on, but he didn't do it too publicly.
Yeah, but it wasn't the core of his philosophy anymore, as it was earlier with Leary was. Yeah. But like Ken Kesey said the same. It was Ken Kesey's dynamic was funny because it was California versus New York, and there was much more the merry pranksters. There were the party bus and all that. But Kesey said he figured it out at one point that he thought LSD was going to save the world, and then he realized no, you have to get beyond the drugs. It's beyond LSD, and it was through meditation and sobriety. Actually, was the ultimate trip, whatever you want to call it. But he said it's not as popular because people just want to get high and they want to have fun on drugs. So trying to say, hey, everybody, we have to stop doing the LSD, and everybody's just like, no, we're going to keep doing the drugs. For me, I think LSD is a great teacher, but again, I use mushrooms because they're what you're getting, and LSD you don't know what you're getting on the streets. So I just use the And also
Yeah.
mushrooms only last about 4 hours. So, but again, it's like once or twice a year. It's not something you do all the time and you learn from it.
Yeah.
But for most people that they're not going to do that, and that's fine. But like you said, if you can be happy sober, if you can find your inner peace and your happiness and through meditative practices and doing, I love yoga. I do jujitsu. I think it's just a really good exercise, and it's found kind of therapeutic in its own way. But these things are so important for us.
I think people who are drawn to doing drugs like I was, and you still are doing, there's a need for it. And there are some things that we need to address in our psyche that drugs are very useful for. And for me, I went and I explored that to the very end, and I basically addressed everything that needed to be addressed. And so I feel absolutely 100% wonderful about having done all the psychedelics and, even cocaine, because it brought me to my knees. I mean, a lot of us would not have ever surrendered to our addiction if we had not become addicted to cocaine. And for you, probably the same with opiates. I mean, when something is gripping you so that your soul just feels like it can't burst through, that's when you realize that drugs are tricky. I mean, you have to be an alchemist to get it right. Yeah. And even mushrooms, I've done a lot of mushrooms. There's always a down for every up. There's always an aftermath. And the neat thing about when you've learned to train your consciousness so they can be elevated just by your own power, there's no hangover, there's no after effects. And it's really quite nice. And it can come with you in all states of being. It doesn't have just to be when you're meditating. You can actually bring meditation into your life, and you can be in a state of meditation all the time if you have certain techniques that you learn.
Yeah. And I do notice I will say this one thing though about mushrooms is I don't have any hangovers. So mushrooms actually feel better the next day than I did the day before. But no, sometimes I'll notice that I have these really amazing feelings when I'm reading, like when I read Eckhart Tolle. If I'm constantly reading something like that, even though if I've read it before and I know what he's saying, it doesn't matter. Just constantly going through those pages when I go to work, you say it's easier to access, that kind of life. And I just really, when I go through periods of complete sobriety, those are the happiest times. I mean, they're just, you really feel like yourself. I try to think back when I was a kid riding my bike and stuff. I had the best times of my life playing in the woods, and there wasn't any drugs and alcohol. That wasn't even a part of it. That was once, the pain and the suffering and heartbreak and everything that happens growing up, and alcoholic parents, stuff like that leads to now I'm trying to escape myself. That's when the drugs came in. They didn't come in when I was enjoying life. So,
yeah, I think it's very important to surround yourself with great reading, great teachers, great friends. I mean, to have a friend who's a downer is a dangerous thing if you have, the desire to maintain a higher vibration in life. I mean, you can help people, yes, but sometimes people don't want to be helped. And sometimes a drowning person will want you to drown with them. So it's very important about who you hang out with once you're committed to this higher vibration that you want to maintain. And I love Eckhart Tolle. I carry a little booklet of Ramana Maharshi with me. He's a yoga dude. And I always have some kind of reading with me. If I just happen to be somewhere, instead of whipping out my phone, I'll just have a little, hand reading. But on my phone, of course, I have all of Eckhart Tolle's books. He's just great. And I'm actually reading it in Spanish with this friend she and I study Spanish. And it's a very interesting thing. Yeah, he's actually a Spanish speaker. Did you know that?
I did not.
He was raised in Barcelona. And first in Germany and then Barcelona. So he speaks Spanish as well as he speaks German and English.
I didn't know that. I spent about a year and a half waking up every day and going through Spanish flashcards and trying to learn it. And I got nowhere. It was so much harder than I realized, but I still would love to. My sister's fluent.
Oh, keep it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, keep it up, because it's also, it's much better as you get older for your brain cells, and they'll stay vital. I mean, I study a little bit. They have such great apps these days. They have there's a slow news in Spanish. I mean, it's really an altered state when you're studying another language.
That's
Check
great.
out that.
I forgot about
Check
the
out that
apps.
app.
Like is Babylon one of them? I think I've seen.
Oh,
There's,
no, that's not so good. That you have
no.
to pay for it.
Oh,
But there's slow Spanish news,
slow
and it's
Spanish
free.
news. Okay.
Yeah, and it gives you a vocabulary. You don't even have to go to a dictionary. You just like you see a word you don't know, and you just put a finger on it, and it shows you the translation. And it's a wonderful thing to speak another language. When we talk about altered state, you go into a different part in your brain, and that's why it's almost tiring. You get exhausted when you're trying to learn a language because you're going into making new pathways, and the more you dig in those gray matters and make the connections, it gets easier. But I never give up. We're going to Bolivia. We're leaving for a couple months. We're going to spend time, and I love South America. I love chewing coca leaves.
Oh yeah. Now is chewing the leaves more similar to like a caffeine kind of
It's
feeling?
no, you don't feel like a buzz at all. With caffeine, you can feel a buzz.
Yeah.
With coca leaves, it's a wonderful taste, and it's a ritual, of course, to have the wad in the mouth. But you just feel good. You feel nutritious and strong, and it has no effect of being stimulated.
Gotcha.
And the Inca used to use it instead of taking food or water. So they would go on these long hikes, and they could just go all day chewing the coca leaves without being thirsty or hungry.
Gotcha. So the cocaine that they derive out of it is like an extreme extract that's a lot more potent.
Yes,
actual plant.
That's an extreme thing, and there's such a tiny bit of the actual cocaine in the coca leaves that you don't feel like, oh my God, you're on a chemical high. You don't feel that at all. You just have this wonderful, satisfying feeling of not being hungry and not being tired while you're chewing coca leaves. And also for me, I have altitude sickness. I get, because I have asthma, it helps expand your lungs. I think it actually expands all capillaries in your body. So it's actually a remedy for people who have altitude sickness, who have trouble breathing in high altitudes.
Yeah, we just got back from Aspen, and we did some hiking. And the first time I went to Aspen, I had no problems. But post-COVID, after having COVID twice, it was different, and I got dizzy a few times. And so yeah.
Wow.
But I'm guessing you can't get coca leaves in the States, though. That's not a.
No, you can't unless you know somebody who grows them. I was trying to grow them, but it's very hard. You have to have really, really particular conditions. But no,
Yeah.
And you can get coca tea, but I don't think the states will allow you to import it.
Yeah.
It's basically just a non-legal substance right now. There used to be a bush I knew about in Miami. I used to go down there to the Fairchild Gardens, and I think hurricane somebody or other blew it away, though.
Oh man.
Well, you had COVID twice. Wow.
We had it right in March of 2020. I got it right before I even really was aware that it was about it. We got shut down, and I was sick right as we were getting shut down. And it was I just thought I had the flu or something.
Without any vaccination, right?
Well, no vaccination and no and also no diagnosis. I was weird. I remember I was sick. It felt like I had a really bad flu. And I found out one of the guys, a friend of mine, had just got back from Costa Rica, and I hung out with him that night. And he was old. He's an older guy, so he was very sick. Went to the doctor, positive for COVID. I had hung out with him, so I'm like, I had the same thing. I knew it was COVID. I went to the doctor. But by the time I went to the doctor, which was just 2 days after, I was already almost better from it. But I wore my mask, and my doctor was just like, you can take your mask off. I can tell you right now, you don't have COVID, which was a weird thing. I was like, I just told you I was with somebody who has it. I was sick with a fever that felt like the flu, and was in bed. And you're just telling me to take my mask off and sitting right in front of you and telling me I don't have COVID without any test. And he was just like, but be careful out there, because it's out there. It's just not, you don't have it, but it's out there. I'm like, okay. So I went home, but yeah, it kept coming back for like 2 weeks. I would have dizzy spells, and then all of a sudden, and then my wife got it, and my wife got it. She actually tested positive. So I know that we had it, but I was already better at that point. Because she would have spells too, where all of a sudden I would find her just passed out in the bathroom. I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, I don't know. It's just like, it was so weird. So
wow.
It's a strange illness. It's not,
well,
everybody's
glad
like,
you
it's just like a
guys
flu.
are okay now.
Yeah, me too.
Well, yeah, listen, but the after effects.
Yeah, that's the thing. We don't know. Yeah, we don't know how.
We don't know.
And that's what's scary about it.
It's a mystery. This disease, I mean, it's like, okay, we were talking about like what is it all about? Like the crises and the politics. I mean, who knows? This is all a mystery. And we're all in this mystery together. We're just like watching the story unfold.
Yeah. It's strange. It's really been strange. And it was weird for me because I just read, I won't keep you much longer, but I just read Brian Greene's Until the End of Time. And I really, it was a really, really amazing, fascinating book, but I also hated the book because it just breaks everything down into math and particles. And it took the beauty out of life for a minute. And right after I got done reading that book, got COVID and got shut down. And it was just a very awkward way to go into the shutdown.
Wow. It was too analytical, huh? It was too much nuts and bolts. And
when you look at life like that, but also I think consciousness is still never explained. And I think that's the one thing you're not going to be able to explain. And that's the beauty, right? That we don't know what the consciousness is. And I think it's something.
And that's why people are so intrigued by drugs and alcohol and meditation and anything that can change our consciousness, because it's really fun and it's satisfying to explore the endless possibilities of what our mind, this metaphysical organ, not necessarily the brain, the mind is incapable of so much. I mean, we can cure ourselves of cancer if we want to.
Yeah.
And we can get ourselves out of this dilemma with the world and the political situation. We can, if we all just really watch our thoughts and change them when we see negatives or despair or anything that's not filled with hope.
Yeah. And that's what we have to do. And for every one of us that finds that positivity and doesn't, even if you disagree with somebody, if you're not negative back to them, we can, that's how we're going to heal. And remember Eckhart Tolle, when he opens up the book, New Earth, about the flower, like the first flower that ever came into existence probably died pretty fast, but eventually they all started happening. And then it just happened all at once. The whole world just lit up. And that same thing he's talking about can happen with human consciousness.
Exactly. That's beautiful. I love that book. It's so wonderful. It just shows you that first we have to learn to love ourselves, because that's really what the power of now is about, just being in that state of awareness of ourselves. And then, and only then, can we really help the world, become into that place of magic and embracing the magic.
Definitely. I think this is a good place to call it. But before I let you go, I have two questions. One is that art. Is that your painting behind you?
Yes, this is my painting, and this is my grandmother's weaving. That's 150 years old. I'm new and old. I do visionary work.
I love
and
that.
I have 4 books out that I would call visionary books also. You've read one of them.
Yeah, tell me about your books, and let's talk about where can people get your books.
Well, I have this great website, TeZaLORD.com, spelled with 1 Z. TeZa, although I probably should have a couple of Z's in there, like TeZZZZA, TeZa, because people bastardize my name. That's why I capitalized the Z. And I have a 5th book. I'm shopping it around right now. It's the first time I've written a novel, and it's a pretty magical novel. I call it an echo fiction. It's really about what we are doing here in this earth and the bottom that we are experiencing and what we're going to do about it. Really, it ends on a very positive note, very magical note. And so all those are available on my website or Amazon. And I have a big presence in social media. I'm all over the place, not Facebook so much, but I do have a private sanctuary that I call like a little temple of love. It's called We Are One Love. That's a private group. And then it got me to doing these nice meditations that I call mind stillers that I put up on my YouTube channel.
And what's your YouTube channel?
It's just TeZa. You type in TeZa Lord.
Oh,
type
awesome.
in the name. My name is all over the place. I'm going to do some of those.
I'd love to try out one of your meditations, so I'm going to do that.
Yeah, mind stillers. The last one I did was for people who have trouble sleeping. There's a lot of people who just, they have to have their CBD or whatever, or THC even, but whatever, whatever people need to get to sleep. But sometime you're probably going to be in a place where you don't have your aids, and it's nice to know that you can talk yourself into a nice, dreamy place. And so that's what my last Mind Still was about. And then my husband and I have the podcast, ZLORD podcast, which we've been doing for years. And that's really been fun because, like you said earlier, he's pretty much of a hardcore born-again Christian, God bless his little head. And I am a lifelong Eastern mystic. And how we came together is really quite amazing, because we're coming from opposite spectrums of how we define the sacred. But through podcasting, we have been able to, come up with the vocabulary to use. And there's a lot of people who would be interested in that, because too often podcasters are just like all about the same thing, and this is a little bit of back and forth, and a little bit of somebody called us the George and Gracie of spirituality.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, that's great.
It's pretty funny.
Yeah, and I'm gonna keep listening to your podcast. I'm excited to actually, because like I say, the only one I listened to, because I just found out about today, was the one you did solo. So I'd love to see hear the dynamic you're talking about. It sounds really interesting.
And what'd you think about that? I haven't talked to anybody yet who's listened to that one.
I mean, I loved it for the fact that I've been having that anxiety myself, that things are getting worse, and for you just to listen to someone say, "Hey, I don't think it's getting worse. This could be the bottom that we needed to get back to living a healthier life, or as a society, collective life." And I love that idea, because I needed that. I needed to hear that, I think. And I'm still not 100% sure I agree with you completely, but I hope that you're right. And I think that there's a good shot that we have a good shot, humanity, of getting out of this. But there's still a lot out there that's the political stuff is what's scary. I have a friend from Argentina, and he said this reminds him of his country.
Oh my God. Argentina is really, well, it's not as bad as some other countries,
like Russia, Ukraine,
or Venezuela. Venezuela is way worse. Yeah. But Argentina has, a lot of, anyway, we're going to Bolivia and all the countries that we're experimenting with, another way, are going back to heavy duty socialism. And so there's a big shift. And you mentioned Costa Rica. We go to Costa Rica a lot. And it's a very interesting country, because it basically has maintained the middle course, and because it's devoted to ecotourism rather than industry or commercialism, it has this wonderful pura vida attitude. Life is pure. Don't you feel it's a very uplifting place?
I've never been to Costa Rica.
I thought you said your friend came back from Costa Rica. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah,
yes, the world is always changing.
I want to go to Costa Rica for my 40th, but I think we're doing Puerto Rico instead, because I can't get enough of my friends to go all the way to Costa Rica. So.
Oh, how funny! It's pretty cheap to fly from Orlando or something.
I'll look into it. I mean, I'd rather. I haven't been to Puerto Rico either, though, so I'm excited to see that.
Yeah,
so I want to go.
I spent 10 years living in the Caribbean, so that's my stomping grounds. Yeah,
you sailed around the Caribbean. And I wanted to talk to you about that, but you know what? I got to get to work anyway. So maybe we'll do one of these again.
I know
some of the stuff that I did.
Okay,
bring up,
we'll do that again. Thanks for having me on, Aaron. I really enjoyed it. We had fun. I told you.
Thank you so much for doing it. Yes, it was really nice meeting you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Okay, take care.
All right, peace, Nicks. Thanks for tuning in. Again, if you like what we're doing, give us 5 stars on Apple Podcast. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter at the Peace on Drugs Podcast, and go to www.thepeaceondrugs.com/subscribe to subscribe to our newsletter. And as always, we're going to let Twiggy Branches take us on out.
You pay for what you can't. You pay for what you can't. When you align yourself with the Phobia jet set. Bad head, bad high, moves hard, pocket in mind. No one sending love east. Cocaine and smog, watching the sunrise. what